What happens when one of Asia's sharpest minds goes head-to-head with one of America's most controversial presidents? On the same talk show? It's the 1980s. The Cold War is still simmering. The US is worried about communists in Central America. And on international TV, two political heavyweights are asked the same question. History proved that only one of them was right. Let's roll the tape and learn why credibility begins with humility.
The analogy between Vietnam and Central America is constantly being made in the United States. Do you consider it a valid one?
Yes and no. Yes, in the sense that foreign wars, however small, if they are long drawn out and they're carried back to the United States on TV, means the total involvement of the American people, and therefore it's got to be sharp, decisive, and conclusive. Knowing that this is not Southeast Asia, the Nicaraguans are not Vietnamese, either in numbers or in the culture, and being much nearer home, I would have thought much more relevant to America's immediate strategic interests.
And when critics of our policies in Central America these days warn against the kind of involvement in Central America that might lead to another Vietnam, you would say what to them?
Well, I heard Mr. George Ball on radio last night in some program which you, Mr. Couple, also took part. And I felt that he was very wise, but unduly wise. I mean, can we really predict history the way we extrapolate one event into another? Is history done the way it's written up? Nobody writing up the history of Vietnam of the last 30, 40 years since 1945 could have predicted the outcome, because it's not just what the Vietnamese do, but it's what the Vietnamese do in the context of a changing world and how that world perceives its interests and either checkmates or facilitates Vietnamese ambitions. I do not know about Central America, the people, the cultures, the underlying thrusts of history there, but I do not believe it is profitable for Americans to be so obsessed about failure in Vietnam as to become paralyzed from what must require American attention and initiative, and if necessary, I wouldn't say intervention, but some action to prevent a gradual erosion of America's strength, America's stability, America's assets in the region.
That, my friends, is vintage Lee Kuan Yew. Calm, analytical, and allergic to lazy analogies. Notice how he begins with yes and no, instantly diffusing the binary trap of the question. He refuses to give the host a headline, but delivers something much rarer: perspective. Lee doesn't moralize. He contextualizes. He's not selling certainty. He's modeling how to think. While American politicians were still haunted by Vietnam, Lee was saying, relax, history is not a copy-paste function. He admits there's much he doesn't know, yet speaks with clarity about what he understands. It's leadership by mental clarity, the kind that built Singapore from a swampy port to a financial hub. Remember, smart people answer questions. Wise people, they question the question.
President Nixon, and ask you, Mr. President, what it is in the context and with all the memory of Vietnam, and with particular reference to the point that Prime Minister Lee made just a few moments ago, namely that as we look back, we could not possibly have predicted what came out after the Vietnam War. What are your views on what we ought to be doing in Central America? And if you will, draw an analogy, if you think it's appropriate, to Vietnam.
Well, it's interesting to note that in the debate over El Salvador, aid to the government of El Salvador, when it was under attack and is under attack from communist guerrillas, and now in the debate over whether or not we aid the Contras, the anti-communist against the communist government of Nicaragua, over and over again we hear the refrain, no more Vietnams. We must not have El Salvador be another Vietnam. We must not have Nicaragua be another Vietnam. The way to avoid that is not to make the mistake we made in Vietnam. That is to provide in El Salvador enough aid, arms and training and so forth to combat the aid being provided by Soviet bloc to the guerrillas. And then the people of El Salvador, as they've presently demonstrated, will be able to contain it. And insofar as Nicaragua is concerned, the way to avoid Americans having to be committed to Nicaragua is to provide aid now to the anti-communist guerrillas who are willing to risk their lives against a repressive communist government. If we provide enough aid for them, that government will be kept busy enough within its own borders that it won't make trouble with its neighbors, and it will discourage also the Soviet Union from putting another base there. Putting it very bluntly, it's far better to provide that aid now to the conquerors than to have Americans have to go in later and remove a Soviet base.
Mr. President, with all due respect, you remember history as well as I do. You remember it better than I do because you lived it. That is how we began in Vietnam. We began, first of all, by underwriting the French effort. We began then under President Eisenhower, when you were vice president, in giving certain modest aid to the South Vietnamese to help themselves. It didn't work.
It didn't work because instead of continuing to provide as much aid to the government of South Vietnam as the Soviet Union was providing to the North Vietnamese, as a result of that failure, 2 years thereafter, the Soviet tanks rolled into Saigon.
Classic Nixon. We lost in Vietnam not because we fought too hard, but because we didn't finish the job. Where Lee saw complexity, Nixon saw repetition. And here's the kicker. The people that Nixon saw as hardline communists, the Sandinista government in Nicaragua, weren't actually communists, but Marxist-inspired socialists trying to chart their own path. Indeed, by 1990, the Sandinista government in Nicaragua was voted out, not overthrown by US-backed rebels, but replaced peacefully in an election. And in nearby El Salvador, years of US military aid only prolonged a brutal civil war that ended in the same way. Not with victory, but with negotiation. The rebels Nixon wanted to fund didn't win. What ended the conflict wasn't more American firepower. It was negotiation, fatigue, and shifting global winds. Exactly what Lee Kuan Yew predicted. History doesn't repeat. It improvises. Nixon's prescription, more aid, more guns, more pressure, produced chaos. Lee's advice, don't extrapolate Vietnam, aged like a masterclass in strategic realism. 2 men, 2 minds, 2 ways of seeing the world. Lee Kuan Yew taught us that clarity beats certainty. Richard Nixon reminded us that ego often outlasts evidence. So whether you're leading a country or just trying to make sense of your own battles, remember this: the past is a teacher, not a template. And wisdom means knowing when the old story no longer fits the new world. And to be fair, even Lee Kuan Yew wasn't immune to the very trap he warned against. Lee had just launched Singapore's Graduate Mother Scheme, which favored children of college graduates, believing educated mothers raise smarter kids, sparking fierce debate even from colleagues. A reminder that even the wisest leaders can overestimate their own certainty. Thanks for watching.